Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dixon. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. The sun has come out. You may see sort of glimpses of light just coming through the curtains here, which is great. We've been in sort of a period of terrible weather here in the UK for the last couple of weeks or so, but it's on Saturday we've got a bit of sunshine. I'm recording this on a Monday, and the sun is out. I feel like spring may just about sort of peek its head out from behind the curtains in the next week or so, which would be great. A big pickup for everybody. On with today's episode, and my guest today is Jenny McNeil. Jenny is the founder of Feast Fable, a UK-based immersive dining studio that transforms meals into multi-sensory, narrative-driven experiences. She works at the intersection of food, theatre, and experiential design, creating events where menus, flavors, and sensory cues are integrated into the story from day one. That's as good as an introduction as I've read in ages on the podcast. Let's welcome our guest today, Jenny McNeil. Jenny, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, James.
Very, very welcome. And continuing some discussion, I've recorded an episode already today with a chef. It kind of continues a subject very close to my heart, which is food, both the consumption of and cooking food. But I love, when I was kind of reading the background on the business today, the idea and everything that was in that sort of opening paragraph that I've just given, then the idea of basing events around food, not rather than food just sort of being an element of it, if that makes sense. You're really the person to talk to us a bit more. Tell us a little bit. Let's start with you, first of all, about your own journey and how that led to Feast Fable.
Okay, sure thing. So I'm a little bit of a hybrid in that I am a chef, but I'm also a marketeer. So when I first kind of came out of uni all those years ago, I'd been living in France for a little bit and loved food, but didn't think of it as a career. So went down a more traditional path into marketing and worked in marketing, client side and then agency side in London for about 10 years. And then one day just went, oh, I do not like sitting at a desk. I don't like being tied to one spot, which has been something that's followed me around ever since, and ended up doing a ski season. So I went to the Alps and was chalet hosting, cooking, guiding, all of the stuff that you did back then. And very much fell in love with food, and thought, right, this is something I could probably do, more seriously. So when I came home, went back into marketing for a little bit. It took about a year for me to realise it still wasn't for me, hadn't changed. And so went to chef school. So I went to the Leith School of Food and Wine, did a professional diploma, which is normally a year, but they let me skip the first term because I already had a bit of cooking experience. And came out the other side a fully fledged chef in theory. And I think because I was slightly older at the time, I decided not to go into kind of restaurant cooking. I did do a couple of restaurant experiences, and I worked at the Fat Duck, I worked at the Tate Modern and various places like that, which were very challenging and difficult places to work when you have very little restaurant experience. But ultimately starting my own company was the dream, and I started Ginger Jar. So Ginger Jar is my catering company, which still runs today in the background. And I think because I'd had lots of marketing clients and lots of friends and colleagues that still worked in marketing, it quite soon became very bespoke and very kind of designing food for specific product launches or particular niche things that you couldn't find on your general kind of ABC caterer. And then about 10 years ago, in fact it was 10 years ago, because I was looking at the 2016-2026 trend and looking back today at things, and I met the founders of Gingerline. So Gingerline being the sort of pioneers, I suppose, of immersive dining in London. They were looking for someone to start the B2B side of the business and to, I suppose, kind of embed and run all of the food into their long-term projects, of which they had 2 or 3 running simultaneously. So we started Flavorology, Gingerline's Flavorology, and ran that for about 6 or 7 years with kind of COVID gap in the middle. And I suppose Feast and Fable, with it being now 100% mine, is a kind of culmination of all of those sort of experiences. So coming from a kind of chef world, coming from a marketing world, and then now we approach our events like a kind of marketing campaign brief, I suppose, but
Mm.
with food as a huge point of difference, narrative point all the way
Mm.
through it. And I still chef, I still, fundamentally design food for all of the experiences, but I also have I'm a conceptual experience designer overall, over and above just the food side of it. So
So,
yeah.
how does this sort of, I suppose, sort of conceptualized, sort of narrative-driven way of experiencing food and combining that with an event work then? Because when I was sort of thinking about this before today's recording, I'm thinking that a lot events are sort of very much sort of like jigsaws or Lego sets. Sometimes you have pieces that you kind of assemble together to
Yeah.
build, these building blocks that build your event, of which food will be an element of that. There'll be a time allotted within your schedule of your event, and a
Mm.
space. Right, there's the meal service or there's the food being done. And it plays a part in the overall event experience, whereas it strikes me that you're reversing that. You're making the food what encompasses everything, and then getting the pieces of the event to slot in around the food. Would that be fair? Or have I completely misunderstood that?
No, that is, so I think it depends. So I guess if you look at the range of events we do, food as a narrative point can actually be 10 to 20%, or it could be 100%. It really
Right.
depends on the experience and what the kind of outcome of the experience is. I suppose if we were designing for a food-based product, so if it was a food, a food or a drinks brand, then the food will be a larger proportion of it. But sometimes if we're working for, I don't know, a finance brand, American Express, or that kind of thing, or just something that's less obvious, maybe sports, retail, fashion, beauty, then food is used as one of the narrative devices. So one of the devices that essentially locks everything together. So I think you're right in that, obviously every event has all of these different building blocks that come together. Our view is that conceptually they should really link. So rather than it being like block A, block B, block C, and they all
Mm.
kind of follow a loose theme, that they should all support each other in a wider function to really kind of prop up a story in a way that, I mean, we were just talking off camera before we started about, different classic novels. And
Yeah,
if you think
yeah.
about all of the building blocks of a classic novel, you have the love interest, you have the narrative devices, you have the journey, you have the end or the intrigue, and but they all build to form a novel. They don't build to form a collective of short stories. And that's
Mm.
the point, I suppose, of what we do, is that we're using food as a narrative thread, but there's so many other things that contribute that to make the kind of
Mm.
end event or the end experience.
Oh, and when you talk to clients about, I guess that it might be a sort of a twofold thing. Some clients will come to you because they kind of know, broadly speaking, or maybe in a bit more detail, what it is you can offer and what you can bring to the party. I would guess that there are a certain element of your clients who come to you on recommendation, but who have maybe not gone into it in as much detail with their events before, in the way that you're leading the sort of the food and the event link up and conversation before. So how does that drive itself, and does it take clients who have not experienced that before a while to understand exactly how they should be thinking?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to what that client's or your main contact, I suppose, or group of contacts, what their kind of personal experience is. If they've been to a ginger line, if they've been to a punch drunk, if they've been to something where personally they've experienced immersive theatre and immersive storytelling, then they can understand it a little bit more about how it would fit to their brand experience. If they're not a foodie and they don't really go, they've never been to sort of the immersive stuff, then they don't really understand what the possibilities are, I suppose. And what you tend to do is then have to sort of do this, crash course in what it is that's possible, because generally they'll always start off going, okay, we're going to do a really nice themed dinner. And a really nice themed dinner is a great thing, and it can be experiential, and it can be really powerful. But what we try and do is layer much more on top of that, many more levels of engagement and touch points and sensory points that will really kind of compound everything. But it,
Mm.
it sort of depends on where they're starting with, whether or not they'll understand it. And it doesn't mean that if they haven't personally experienced that stuff, that they're not going to get it. You just have to go on a bit more of a journey to get them to understand it. And I think also one thing that people don't fully understand is the number of formats we can do. So, you know, whereas, as I said, some people might come thinking, well, okay, it's a dinner, specifically a dinner, sit down dinner. We're going to be looking at tablescapes and menus and nice menus and all that kind of stuff. But we're not necessarily going to be looking at you know, sorry, I'm just distracted.
Yeah,
We're not going to be looking at the kind of what, you know, the wider context of performance or for other things that kind of going on.
sure.
Um, and so I think, you know, what we can do is very much look. We can look at the dinners, but we can look at multi-room experiences. We can look at stand-up experiences. We look at a whole different bunch of formats that look to essentially engage you in an active way rather than being passive, which actually sometimes a dinner can be quite passive in that you're just sitting there and kind of engaging in something, but you're not necessarily participating. And our
Mm,
main thing is to get people to participate, because in that way they're immersed in a way that they're not if they're just experiencing something.
sure.
Um,
Well, I suppose at this point, I'm feeling like we should get into maybe letting you explain how it actually physically manifests itself.
mm,
Are we talking about, changes to structure, so breaking out of the traditional like starter, brief break, main course, brief break, dessert? Are we talking about changes to the flow of meals, or how does some of the things that you've talked about actually manifest themselves from a food point of view?
yeah, I suppose. Well, so I'll use examples because I think it's easier to kind of
Mm,
explain it. So the more traditional format would be something like we did for Tropic. So skincare brand, they're a plant-based skincare brand.
right.
Very much look at they have very much used sort of natural ingredients in all of their products. So they wanted to do a dinner that was really kind of inspired by the hero products, and that's really easy for us because you're looking at coconut, you're looking at, you know, herbs, you're looking at sort of perfumes and florals that you can actually eat and bring into the food in a really kind of obvious line, I suppose. But the brief for us to then, or the challenge for us then, is to kind of, okay, so how do you change that from just being a lovely plant-based dinner? So what we did is look at the way people use the products and look at sort of the beauty ritual, I suppose, that
Mm,
people participate in when they go through that. So at the end of the day or the morning, and build that into the meal. So you had courses that were all about cleansing, so the things that were all about kind of gut health and all just different elements over on the top of just sort of this is a nice tasty plant-based meal at this particular point.
mm,
There were elements there where you made a course for somebody else that was about the kind of self-care and participating in care and care of somebody else. So there were lots of just sort of different elements to it. But then you take that and you kind of throw all of that up in the air and you do something like we did for Warburton's, where we essentially did a multi-room underground experience where you go from room to room experiencing completely different environments when you move. So we did the day in the life of a bagel when they did an experience to sort of take on New York Bagel Factory head on,
mm.
and they were using Robert De Niro at the time in their press ads and then TV commercials. So we did this sort of underground, challenging, Peaky Blinder-esque experience where you really didn't know what you were going to go into. So you were met at the door by sort of these two kind of lurking strangers. You went downstairs, and then you actually went into this sort of day in the life style thing where the first course you were sitting as if you were a TV audience under a life-size TV screen, and you had a Morecambe and Wise style dancers performance within the TV screen making a meal
Sure,
as they
yeah.
go and
Yeah,
then
the classic
handing
sort of
that,
breakfast sketch.
yeah, the kind of, yeah, the opening and closing of doors and, you know, kind of dancing
Yeah.
away to it, to a piece of music and a piece of scripted song that was bespoke written. And then they would open some cupboards and bring out your starter and hand it through the TV screen to you. And then you'd walk out of that room and go into another one and have another course, and then you ended up in a pub, in the kind of Peaky Blinders pub, playing darts with a character to have kind of curry and beer. So yeah, it's kind of completely, you know, thrown in the air experience compared to a dinner. Yeah.
What a fascinating way to kind of, change how we've sort of long integrated food into our events, whether
Mm,
that be, it could be a sort of a high level business, dinner for, 20 executives who are wanting to
mm,
discuss business around a table. It could be the end of a day's conferencing. It could be an awards event. There's any number of sort of events that utilize food within them, but that strikes me as a complete, re-understanding of how we would deliver the food, and combine
Yeah.
that with an experience. And I guess once clients understand that about what it is that you're trying to conceptualize and create for them, that brings a whole sort of new level of creativity to them, particularly with this sort of the experiential and the brand activation stuff. I'm guessing that they
Yeah.
would be really keen to sort of buy into this once they understand the concept.
Yeah, it's very much the sweet spot. I think we split what we do into two sides. One we call Brave Brands, and the other one we call Daring Hosts. So the gala dinners, the kind of VIP dinners, C-suite dinners, all of that kind of stuff would fit into a Daring Host. So that's where you're not necessarily doing something fun to try and tell a brand story and shift a particular product or service, but you're doing it to potentially entertain people in a kind of more ethereal concept. So it might just be that they need to be in a creative environment that sparks conversation and sparks creative thought, or it might be that it's a 250-year anniversary of a particular company and they want to kind of bring a celebratory message together in a way that gets people to really interact and sort of participate.
Yeah.
So that's very much the kind of Daring Host side. I would say we do probably 70% on the kind of Brave Brand side, where they're really doing events mainly for press or influencers. We always try to get them to extend it out to consumers, because press generally like writing about events that consumers can actually go and experience, as well as just the kind of influencers and press. So we just sort of say, once you've built it, extend it out, let as many people as possible through it. Because really the food cost, the delivery cost is quite small compared to the whole kind of concept and the venue, and obviously all of the set builds and stuff like that we do. But yeah, you can really go, it's like any kind of good creative brief. You could go many directions. It's never the same format, and it shouldn't really be the same format. So yeah.
And is it always for B2? You mentioned there consumers, so is most of it B2B focused, or do you create experiences that consumers can sort of can access, be it sort of seasonal events like Christmas, for example? Is it something that consumers can access via clients that you're working with?
Yes, some of them. Yeah. So sometimes the client will pay to kind of extend it so that consumers can come to it. I mean, we
Right.
did an event at Christmas called Nutcracker Noir at Protein Studios, where essentially we conceptualized all of the food elements of it, and then we worked with Design Scene and with Secret Theatre, who did the immersive set design and the choreography and the scripting, and we came together as a collective, and that was a ticketed experience. So you and I could buy tickets on Fever, go along, have an immersive dining experience. But that's something I do probably more in kind of consultancy, although we did deliver that from the food perspective as well. And then so when we do things like, so we did an event for Shark Ninja where they launched a double stack air fryer, so for basically people with a slightly smaller kitchen, and we built a double stack air fryer on the South Bank, so a huge 2-story high air fryer with a restaurant inside it.
Holy smokes, right.
And you could come to that, and you basically went through a kind of welcome experience, which I think a lot of people thought was the experience, and then it was secret entrance into the kind of savory course demo with the full chef making the dish in real time in front of you, which you then ate, and then you went through into a kind of really dark and mysterious dessert room, which again the chef was making something in front of you, so showing how you use the air fryers. Ate that, and then you kind of went out the other side. And for that one, we had a sort of trade day, we had press and influencer day, and then I think we had 2 consumer days, so groups of 16 people coming through every half an hour for 2 days, from kind of 12 noon to 9 p.m.
And what a sort of a world that we live in now, that a brand like that, and what is ultimately a kitchen appliance.
Yeah.
I think back to sort of being a kid in the 80s and watching TV. You see adverts on there. Really, when we look at sort of the kitchen appliance world, or domestic appliances, and what avenues were available to them, it was really an advert on the avatar, the TV channels,
Yeah.
the commercial TV channels, maybe on the radio, maybe in newspapers and magazines and things like that. If you think about just the sheer opportunities that are available to a brand like Shark Ninja now to launch what is a domestic appliance for the kitchen,
Yeah.
Now, to be able to do something of that nature and the reach that it gives you, because no doubt you've got people walking past taking photos, that's pushing it out onto
Massive.
social.
Yeah.
You've got the people who are actually participating in the event who are then reposting that. You've got press that can come to it. Just the sheer reach that you can then generate just by
Mm.
being creative, and the opportunities that we've now got. You must sort of wake up every day with a new idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the reason that QVC was so popular back in the day was because people were seeing people using it. So, it wasn't just about you know, the catalog. I mean, obviously catalog sold loads and loads of stuff, but you couldn't see people using it. Whereas now, with TikTok and with Instagram and with all of the social channels, then you can create this content of real people using it rather than just, a person in a sort of demo studio. And that's the thing that gets it. That's the thing of people going, I'm a TikTok viral air fryer brownie, and suddenly you've sold 20,000 units. Those kind of things are the things that tip things over now, which is why the content that we create that put people inside these experiences is so shareable and so repeatable. And that's why people pay us to do what we do, because it's not just about a kind of passive watch sort of demo kind of thing. It's very much about being part of that experience, being invited up to maybe kind of make part of the brownie recipe, being able to kind of feel the things. I mean, we did a whole ASMR piece for Shark Ninja where we recorded a symphony based on the sounds of the clunking drawers and the kind of hissing grills, because they're
Wow.
such beautiful noises.
Yeah.
So when it then came to the experience, we made sure that when it came to the dessert, that people found them inside the drawers of hidden air fryers that were hidden around the room, so they can feel that kind of clunk, which is so
Yeah.
satisfying, like the kind of car door noise.
I've
So
never thought I've never thought about that as, you know, the sounds that things
mm,
make, and being able to then bring that into the experience as well, because the sounds, sense, anything that you're wanting to be immersive, it is ultimately sort of trying to utilize and tap into all of the senses, isn't it? Sight,
yeah,
sound, taste, touch, smell. So
yeah.
music and what people can hear must play such an important element in heightening the senses when food is involved.
Yeah, well, it gives you all of the cues. I sort of always use the kind of, imagine you go to a fancy hotel and there's 5 different restaurants, and a lot about what they're going to be like before you've sat down and eaten in them,
Mm.
because of the cues that they're giving you. Everything from the room design to the music they're playing, to whether or not when you're met by a maitre d' that they sort of talk in a slightly reverent way, or whether or not they're very, kind of vivacious. So you're getting all of these cues before you've tasted any kind of food. And I think it's the same with these kind of experiences. So we use performers. Almost all of our experiences have some kind of performative element, and the reason is that an in-world person, we call the experience the kind of world. An in-world person can act in a way that a kind of regular human wouldn't, and so
Sure.
they can
Yeah.
transport you into the world in a kind of way that you go with them, and you sort of you see all these people that in theory would be quite resistant to being involved or immersed in a way, in an experience, and you see them just kind of going, oh, okay, and
Mm.
getting involved because they can't help it. It's fun. We know how to do it, so even some of the brands we work with can sometimes be a bit scared that their audiences just won't like it and won't participate. We sort of say, well, that's kind of our superpower, to sort of know how to get people to engage. And if they really don't want to, then you leave them and you go for the ones that you can tell they're going to engage with you and are going to sort of soften things up. But it's such a big part of getting people involved. At the performance side of it is such a big part of getting people involved and getting them to really kind of again go from that kind of passive to active state that we're ultimately looking for within our experiences.
And what strikes me as well, talking to you today, and having done a little bit of reading before today's episode, is this idea that everyone, I'm sure everybody can remember a great meal that they've had. And when I say
Mm,
great meal, I don't necessarily mean the fanciest,
no, it's
Michelin
often
starred
not.
restaurant.
Yeah.
Great food experiences can sometimes just come from, eating something as simple as, I can remember having a great, Spanish omelette, a tortilla, in a great little cafe with a great view in Madrid. Just the sun was shining. there were people hustling and bustling around the street.
Mm,
The little bit of food that I had was simple but brilliantly done. I had a small glass of beer. I was sat with my father-in-law, and that I remember that. It's always logged in my head. So, and food experiences and food memories, they can often really allow people immediate access to where they were at a certain time just by
yeah.
remembering a meal, can't it? And I guess that element probably plays a really important role in what you're trying to do, is linking those two things so that the people, if it's a brand event, for example, are really taking away that connection and that memory.
Yeah. Well, I think I can't remember the kind of the technical name for it, but essentially when you smell something, it doesn't get filtered through your brain until for you to then understand it. It goes straight in. So, which is why it's so connected to childhood memory, and why it's so connected specifically to memory, because it's not sort of bypassed by anything. You really can walk down the street and think, oh, I remember that smell, whether that be the kind of donut fry or whatever the thing
Mm,
was. You associate with a particular point in time. So I think that's super important when it comes to the kind of memory making side of it. But I think it's true. I mean, I think meals, we always use this analogy about how, all of the kind of, or most of the big important times of your life are kind of done over meals. The sort of Christmas gatherings, Easter gatherings. There's a reason why food is so culturally important within every culture, really, is that it
mm,
is a time that people come together. And I think what we're sort of trying to get brands to understand is that the reason for that, in a way, is it's slightly transactional. It's like, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to look after you, and I'm going to give you a part of my heart on this plate and in this room. And in return, you give me your time and your attention, because I'm really looking after you. So if you give me your time and your attention, then that's a sort of transaction, and something for them to take away in a way that, again, if you're just walking around, and even you might get some merch, you might get some other kind of takeaway, it's not the same as being kind of cocooned in a food and drink experience, because that's the bit that you really do kind of lock in a way, and that, somebody's really looked after me, they've really understood something that I needed in that moment, and I come away from it feeling richer than I did before.
mm.
And that's what food could do.
Two things have popped into my head
Mhm.
whilst you've been saying that, and the first is a condition, I don't know if you could call it a condition, called synesthesia, where people hear sounds, but it's
Mm,
projected in their brain as color, and
mm,
they see certain colors, and actually it's projected in their brain as sounds.
mm.
It's an interlinking between sound and color, and synesthesia is an absolute thing. And I know some people have actually done synesthesia projects and art projects where certain sounds are then evoking certain colors and projections in people's heads. And
Yeah,
I'm wondering whether or not there is a sort of a food equivalent. I'm sure there'll be people screaming maybe now saying yes there is, but this idea that we've all been in a situation where we've eaten something, and the moment it kind of hits our mouth, you immediately go, that takes me straight back to XYZ.
yeah,
That event, that work trip that I had, that holiday
mm,
that I had, that honeymoon, that wedding. This
mm,
idea that actually just popping something on your mouth into your mouth could then evoke an immediate boom link
yeah,
between another
back,
part of your brain.
yeah,
I'd love to know if there is a sort of a food
a
equivalent
technical thing,
of
yeah.
synesthesia. The other thing
Mm.
that pops into my head was the film Ratatouille.
Yeah, that's so
Uh,
interesting that you
uh,
use
uh,
that as
uh,
an example.
and
Yeah.
this and that wonderful bit at the end of the film where the horrible food critic,
Yes. Mm,
Anton Ego, I think is the character,
mm,
takes the bite of the ratatouille, and there's a great sort of flashback scene where it kind of zooms into him being a little boy having grazed his knee and having a bowl of his
yeah,
mum's ratatouille, and where
yeah,
that bite of food took him to. And that's, for some reason, having sort of made the link to synesthesia, and then I immediately then remembered that scene from Ratatouille, which
yeah.
ultimately is perhaps a really good way of highlighting what we're talking about today, is that instant memory.
Yeah, it exactly is, and it's weird actually. Ratatouille is one of the things that when I met my husband, he one of the first things that he said to me was that he wasn't that into food, and I said, "Oh, I'm not that into theatre," as which he pulled up the theatre play that he was currently in, and so one of the things over time was that, as sort of educating each other into the things that we like. And he always says that Ratatouille was his epiphany moment, because he realised he could eat vegetables because of Ratatouille. And because I think linguistically, the way people describe what they like and don't like about food, I always find it really interesting. So he sort of says, you know, I can eat that or I can't eat that. I mean, obviously, you can eat all of it physically, you can physically put it in his mouth and chew it. But, you know, he has got really definite psychological barriers around some different types of food based on either trying them as a child or being probably forced to eat them as a child. And they've created, you know, these boundaries in his mind around food and what you can and can't have. And one of the big things about what we do and is that, you know, we certainly within the Gingerline world, which was a great place to be because it was a set secret menu. You didn't know what you were having before you came. So my job was to make people like things that they didn't think that they liked or hadn't previously liked, because when they eat them in this setting that's not a normal setting, that, you know, that they're pushed to do so because it's in front of them and it looks delicious, it looks inviting, and it fits within the world that they're in. And people have come out kind of going, oh, I didn't think I could eat mustard, or I didn't think I liked X. And, you know, and you sort of think, oh, you know, in the right context, in the right place, then you do. And it might not be something you eat all the time, but it's like, you know, experiencing apple tea when you're on holiday in Morocco and then thinking it's disgusting when you come home. In the right place, in the right time, these things can be amazing. But they don't necessarily always translate to other worlds because all of the other things aren't right, you know, they don't fit.
Yeah, context eating, I guess you could call that, you know, in some respects. It's similar to what I was saying about people remembering a great meal that they had because of the setting, not necessarily because the food was anything fancy. You know,
Yeah,
this idea of context eating is that, you know, what you're eating is also linked to another experience and an idea, or that the experience itself is promoting you to eat something that you wouldn't usually explore because
yeah,
you just feel instinctively that it's right to do so.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it's a
exactly that.
really fascinating subject to get into. I've never discussed this before, which is why I was really looking forward to sort of getting into this conversation today on the podcast and finding out a little bit more about it and how you do it. And I suppose that dovetails us nicely into sort of wrapping up a little bit today. But before we do so, sort of letting people know how they find out a little bit more, because I'm sure people have listened or watched today and gone, oh, this all sounds very interesting. I've never really come across this sort of concept before. How do I
Yeah.
get in touch? So let's answer that question as simple as we can. How do people find out a little bit more about what you're doing at Feast and Fable?
Sure. Well, we've got a portfolio on our website, so which is feast-fable.co.uk. So that portfolio covers some of the different range of experiences we've done, from seated dining to multi-room to all of the different kind of things that we do. Sometimes the consultancy, where we've been to Singapore and cooked in the Ritz-Carlton or different kind of places. But also I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So my Jenny McNeil on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active in terms of just sort of opinion pieces, I suppose, about immersive dining and what it is, and just different sides of it, different concepts of it. So that's a good place to start, to check us out.
Yeah, head over to the website. I had a little look around the website before today's podcast recording, and inevitably, you know, you go through the website, scroll down to the bottom, you'll see links there to the socials, to LinkedIn and to Instagram. So loads of easy ways. And as Jenny said, feast dash or hyphen feast hyphen fable.co.uk. For those of you who are watching today's podcast, that link is on the screen now. But yeah, feast hyphen fable.co.uk for those of you who are listening. Go and check those guys out. Really interesting to see what they're doing, and maybe it's something that you could incorporate into your events if you're planning something a little bit different or looking for some new inspiration as to how you I suppose include and integrate the food element into your event. So Jenny, it's been fantastic speaking to you today. Thanks for taking a bit of time out to have a chat with us.
Thanks for having me on. It's been great to chat all things food.
Fabulous. And yeah, just sort of on the subject I mentioned, watching or listening, you know, if you are watching today's podcast via either the Event Industry News website or on something like YouTube, thanks very much for tuning in. It's been great to have you along and for you to be able to watch us have these conversations. Please do make sure, though, that you are going to wherever you might get your audio podcasts from, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., and make sure that you're subscribed to the Event Industry News podcast so that you get those notifications and you get the latest episodes as they drop into your audio audio podcast platform. Thanks very much for taking a little bit of time out to do that. If you are already listening to us today via one of those audio podcast platforms, thanks very much for doing so. But please do make sure you go in the opposite direction. Head over to eventindustrynews.com. Make sure that you go to the podcast section where you can view video versions of all of our podcasts going right back to, I don't know when it was, 20 something when we started these, probably coming up 10 years now that we've been doing the podcast on Event Industry News. And thanks to everybody who continues to tune in and continues to watch. Whilst you're on eventindustrynews.com, please do make sure that you have a click around the supplier directory. If you work in the events industry and you're looking for a product or a service, the chances are you will find it within the A to Z supplier directory on eventindustrynews.com. Literally hundreds and hundreds of suppliers on there covering every aspect of the events industry. You will find what you're looking for on that directory, as well as, of course, the special news, features, supplements, all the week-to-week, day-to-day news that's happening in the industry that's available on eventindustrynews.com. And a mention for the newest element of the Event Industry News website, which is a dedicated news section for the wedding industry, specifically for people who work in the wedding trade, be it a venue that hosts weddings. You could be a supplier that supplies to weddings. If you work in the business of weddings, there is now a dedicated news and advertising section on Event Industry News for weddings. All you've got to do is go to eventindustrynews.com, click on news, and then you will find the dedicated weddings section of that website. Oh, there we go. It's wrapped up. That's all the spiel at the end of the episode done and dusted. Thanks, as always, for listening to the Event Industry News podcast. And thanks again to my guest, Jenny McNeil from Feast Fable, for joining us. Jenny, thanks very much. We hope to see you soon. Good luck with everything going forward.
Thanks so much.
No problem at all. And we'll see everybody on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Thanks very much, everybody. Goodbye.